I'm going to go over. Last week we went over basics of research design. That was more, distinguishing between experimental design, quasi-experimental design. I looked at topics such as internal and external validity. And this week we're going to continue on with research design, but we're going to look at program evaluation, which is basically a type of research that's different than more theoretical research. And we'll talk about the history of it, the types of evaluation, and the evaluation process. This PowerPoint's available on Blackboard, so you may want to download it. There's a couple of videos, and knowing I have issues with video volume, the sound. So if you have it downloaded, you can watch the video in the PowerPoint presentation instead of watching it via the screen share that I'm using right now with WebEx. And then we'll talk about the evaluation process, the last example. And then, when we're probably done, lecturing stuff will be done. I won't be the full 3 hours, maybe an hour or so. And what we'll do is I'll leave time available at the end for people to work on assignment 1. If you haven't finished that yet, it is due at the end of the day. And it'll also give you an opportunity to work on assignment 2, which I just posted just before class. Okay, evaluation is this is a term that they use in psychology. So the term in psychology is a long history but a short past. And then when they use it in terms of psychology, what they're thinking of, psychology has always been a part of philosophy. So in terms of what motivates people, emotions, all of these elements, the purpose of life, all of these have been part of philosophy. But psychology as a social science, its past is very short. So basically, the first lab in psychology was opened in about, I believe, around the 1850s, 1860s. So it has a very short history, has a very long history in terms of people thinking about psychology, but a very short past in terms of, as a method in science, or attempt to be a method in science. That past is very short. And the same can be said for program evaluation, right back to the foundations of civilization and most cultures too. There'll be some form of accounting in some sense. And there'll be, as human societies develop, the societies improve, and part of that improvement is evaluation of current practices and ways to improve those practices. So I can think of, we typically in this phrase here, which I took from an article that's posted on Blackboard, they're talking about emperors, pharaohs, and monarchs. Well, any society that's hunting based, agricultural based, there's continual improvement, right? So you can think of a First Nations society in North America that had a very active agricultural based economy. They would have been continually evaluating their practices to find improvements, and that was then on an ongoing basis. But that's forms of evaluation. And then within different societies in terms of the military, the economy, the infrastructure. We talked in survey last week about the first census that took place in Canada in the 1600s. That is a form of evaluation, right? It's collecting statistics to help plan the economy and the expansion of the economy in the European settlements in North America. Lee Cronbach, one of the founding members of program evaluation as a social science that attempts to have the rigor of the scientific method, E. Kronbach in 1981 said, evaluation has vital work to do, yet its institutions and its ruling concepts are inadequate. So, he's talking about the long history of evaluation, but then he's also talking about its short past. The rigor in terms of methods that we use, Kronbach argued in 1981, needed to be improved to basically give us a more objective, more valid means to evaluate the effectiveness of different programs, right? And that's one of the, that's one of the purposes of of the RAPP program, is to allow you the opportunity to explore program evaluation methods, both through your coursework and through the running of a mock proposal you're doing first semester, and then working with clients in the second semester on evaluation projects. Okay, so in terms of research, and this is from the perspective of measurement theory and program evaluation, you can think of it as being a dichotomy between conclusion-oriented research and decision-oriented research. So pure scientific research is aimed at firmly establishing the truth of given concepts, right? So it's a focus on conclusions. You want to run a project, and then you want to see, can you draw inferences from your results and conclusions in terms of testing of hypotheses. Applied research often focuses reaching decisions about what to do in practical context, right? So you have a program, you want to evaluate the program to see, is the program effective? Is it meeting its objectives? Has it been implemented the way the plan was to implement it? And if you've worked in any organization, you'll often know, or you'll see, companies or organizations put in place policies and procedures, right? So there are operational policies and procedures. And if you're evaluating it, one of the things you want to look at, well, do the practices of the employees, are they following the policies and procedures? If yes, that's great. And then are they effective? If they're not following the policies and procedures, why are they not following them? Right? So you're reaching decisions in terms of decision-oriented research to change practices, or to change practice. Really, it is to change practices or to affirm. If you're affirming whether the practice works, then that's kind of like in terms of program evaluation, that's conclusion based. Yes, I've evaluated the program is highly effective, therefore I conclude that it's worthwhile to invest money in this to expand it further into, say, make it more readily available to other areas that would benefit from that program. Okay, so in terms of decision-oriented research and evaluation, we may define evaluation broadly as the collection and use of information to make decisions about, in this case, an educational program. Many types of decisions are to be made, and many types of information are useful. It becomes immediately apparent that evaluation is a diversified activity. When we typically think of conclusion-based scientific research in terms of the application of the scientific method, and we talked about last week in terms of research design, you have an independent variable. That's the variable that you manipulate, treatment and control group. And then you have a dependent measure, which you're hoping that the performance on the dependent measure is dependent upon whether the person is in the treatment group or the control group, right, in terms of your independent variable. When you're doing program evaluation work, it's very much a multi-method, mixed method scenario. So you'll be using methods that are more quant-based, such as surveys. You can use methods that are more qual-based, in-depth interviews, focus groups, content analysis. So there's a lot of methods in terms of what you can do to make a decision regarding the effectiveness of a program and whether the standards of the program are being met. In conclusion-oriented research and evaluation, the key sense of the term evaluation refers to the process of determining the merit, worth, or value of something. The evaluation process normally involves some integration or synthesis of the results to achieve an overall evaluation or a set of evaluations. So you're looking at in terms of what are the consequences of the program, unintended consequences, both positive and negative, and we'll go through examples of that in a bit. And goal-free evaluation, right? You're just looking to see not whether the outcomes are achieved. We'll define outcomes in a bit, but just looking at it in terms of okay, let's see how this program is functioning. Let's get feedback from the people who are participating in the program. Let's get feedback from the people who are running the program, and we'll get feedback from the stakeholders who made the decisions to start the program. So you're getting, if it's goal-free evaluation, you're just basically getting a sense, okay, what is going on here? What are the people doing? And are they working within the confines of how this program is defined? Do they self-identify in terms of any barriers in terms of the success of the program? So you're not going in there with the purpose to say, yes, does this program work? Does it not work? Kind of like in an experimental way in terms of a treatment and control. You're going in to kind of like do a diagnostic assessment of the program and having not really a goal in terms of does it work or does it not work, but to get feedback in terms of, well, how effectively is it running? And are there ways to improve the program based on the feedback from those actively involved in the running of it? So as an example, this is an education example of results that are, in a sense, not that are goal-free, right? So if you read through it, it says, as this person said, I would tell the trainee that instead of focusing on his or her goals, or what the lesson was designed to achieve, my comments would focus on what the lesson actually did do, right? So this is goal-free. And this is like an observational method. The results, I would say, are more important than the intentions. Thus, on one occasion, my evaluation went roughly as follows. During the 40 minutes of the lesson, so the person is kind of observing, 3 romances bloomed between pupils sitting near the back of the classroom, though thankfully none of these romances were actually consummated during this time. 2 boys perfected the art of flicking small balls of rolled up paper at the necks of classmates sitting a row or two in front of them. The weekend football results were widely discussed. About a third of the class had no idea what the lesson was about, nor did they seem to care, while about 2/3 of the pupils left the room with the view that animals carrying out respiration while plants do not. Since this was the main effect, it was possibly the aim of the lesson. After a pause, I would add, what a pity this view about respiration is seriously mistaken. So instead of looking to say, you run a test to say, okay, did the students perform well on the test in terms of respiration and photosynthesis, and that's kind of like your outcome measure. What he's saying is, well, if you observe in a goal-free kind of way, you'll get a sense of what's really going on. And what they're seeing is the students were basically fairly disengaged. And that's goal-free. Okay. There is a distinction between formative and summative evaluations. So a formative evaluation, using evaluations to aid the making of decisions about how to improve the effectiveness of programs. Right, so what's happening is you kind of like, the program is like, let's say it's a new program. You evaluate it, and what you're doing is, as you're evaluating it, you're providing feedback to the people running the program to kind of like help them improve the program. We'll go through an example of that in a little bit. A summative evaluation is basically an assessment, well, how effective is the program? Effective in terms of how much it costs to run the program, and comparison to the benefits achieved from the program. So, and this is kind of like more of like a decision-based evaluation in terms of, is it a go, no-go, in terms of, do you keep the program running or do you shut the program down? And more often than not, most evaluations are, they're pretty well a combination of both. You'll have formative elements of it, and then you'll have elements that are more summative. And you'll typically see the more formative, an emphasis on formative for new programs that have, been developed, but haven't been actually, that were implemented and from people's opinions or experts developing the program, and then they kind of like say, okay, let's implement this thing and see how it runs. And then what they need is, they need feedback on a fairly regular basis to make the program better. Okay, difference between formative and summative evaluations. I kind of like this quote. When the cook tastes the soup, this is formative. When the customer tastes the soup, this is summative, right? So in the formative, the cook tastes the soup. They may change or add ingredients to the soup to change the flavor of it. That's a formative element of the creating of the soup. When the customer tastes the soup, then it's kind of like done. So the customer has to make a decision. They either like the soup or they don't like the soup. And that's a summative evaluation. So it's kind of like that's the way you would look at both of them. And in your projects, you're going to probably have a combination of both formative and summative components. Okay. Depending on what area you're working in, you'll have there'll be the people's opinion that evaluation studies should be scientifically rigorous, and anything that's not really that's not a experimental method where you randomly assign people to control and treatment groups is of limited utility. Others argue that evaluation should, however, take many forms, and less rigorous approaches have value in many circumstances. So, in the context of our MRP work, we can I've seen it in past studies within the RAPP program. So, one that was interesting in terms of more, it's in a sense less rigorous method, but it was a study looking at the Barrie Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce was it was a member profile. Right, they want to get an evaluation of just who's engaged in the program, and they have many services. So they run seminars, they have promotional discounts with different organizations, and it was a member engagement survey. And what they wanted to see was, how engaged are the members, and any feedback in terms of how to improve the services provided by the Chamber of Commerce. And it was what came out is that there seemed to be two different groups that were in terms of three different groups in terms of involvement and engagement with the Chamber of Commerce. And there was the engaged people tended to be either new members who had been members of the Chamber of Commerce for, say, less than 5 years, and members who were kind of like lifers, who had been members of organizations that had been members of the Chamber for many years, like 25 or more years. And the least engaged seemed to be the people in the middle. So there seemed to be like a disengaged group. So in terms of taking a more less rigorous route to look at this, then the question was, why is it that there's this kind of like this U-shaped function? High involvement for the newer members, high involvement for the older members, but lower involvement for those that are in between, like say between 5 and maybe 20 years of involvement, membership in the Chamber of Commerce. So that started a new study to assess the engagement of, and that came out of a more let's say less rigorous way. And it was also tied to, as we say, sometimes you find out things from the study that you really hadn't anticipated. So it really hadn't been anticipated yet. You'd see these this U-shaped function for engagement. So that's an unintended, a surprising finding. Then they didn't know that. Well, when you went in, and another study that they did, a separate group of students in terms of a major research project, they went in and did a further analysis of this, and they kind of segmented the Chamber of Commerce members in terms of what their characteristics were and how it might fit with involvement. Well, what they found is that the ones that had been most engaged, that had been members the longest time, were organizations that were service providers to other organizations. So I'm thinking like marketing firms, banking firms, accounting firms, lawyers, um, insurance providers. These people, the ones that they're members of the Barrie Chamber of Commerce, they're not there necessarily for the services of the Chamber of Commerce, but they're there for the networking that they get from being a member. So them going to events to meet other businesses and newer businesses to try and generate business and form contacts. Whereas the ones that are the newer members, they're like smaller businesses, they're more independent businesses, and they provide services and products to directly to customers, not other businesses. It's not business to business. And the needs, and in terms of engagement, are very different for the two groups, right? So if you're a big, if you're representing a bank or accounting firm or a law firm, well, your needs as a member differ from those of, say, someone who's running a small business who's a member of the Chamber of Commerce. So that's why, in terms of evaluation, it's like you have to be fairly open in terms of the methods that you use, and sometimes you have to be fairly creative. And it doesn't follow the scientific method in terms of true experimental design. You can get a lot of information out of a research project, a program evaluation study that has diverse methods. So it's like interviews, surveys, focus groups. And as we're finding now, you're also getting more data analysis, right? So because part of this project was developing profiles from the Barrie Chamber of Commerce members database. So the students had access to that database, and they were able to, based on the information in the database, develop profiles. So then you're getting more into the data analysis side of existing data. And we're looking at now, like say for an MRP for the winter semester, partnering up with big data, where they've designed a data system for an organization, but there's evaluation work that they need in terms of the data system that's been set up. And that program evaluation need will be work that will be done, hopefully, through the RAPP program. And we'll see, you'll have projects that are more almost all qual based, and you'll have projects that are all mostly just survey based. But it's just nice to have, be able to be creative, come up with new and novel methodologies to address very unique problems. And I gave the example I've talked about before with Deaf Blind Ontario. It's a very individuals congenital deaf blindness. It's a very, in terms of people with disabilities, it's a very small population. So it's you're not going to be doing like large sample sizes, and they have significant, many of the people who are congenital deafblind, they have significant cognitive impairments. So it's like, and also so communication is very difficult. So in that case, in that major research project, the student team had to come up with a novel and new research methodology to assess the effectiveness of a program. Okay. So an example of a formative evaluation. So this is Sesame Street. So if you have this slide open, please take the moment now to watch the video. You probably won't hear it from mine. So yeah, if you have the PowerPoint presentation downloaded, take a moment to watch it on your screen away from what I'm doing here. I'm going to watch Elmo. Okay, so Sesame Street became very successful, and part of that success was their commitment to solid program evaluation. So Sesame Street, the origin of the idea of Sesame Street when it first came out, I guess in the late 60s, early in the 70s, was designed to provide underprivileged children with knowledge and skills they often lacked when entering schools. So this is for preschool kids. They watch television. And if they watched educational television, then it was hoped that it would improve their, they would basically learn the fundamental skills in terms of alphabet, colors, and such, numbers, that they would learn those before they started in, say, kindergarten. Okay. And Sesame Street was a very, very different structure in terms of children's programming available at that time. So this had never been done before, but they designed it and they were very creative in terms of their design. Okay, so they did it in a 1 hour magazine format. So what that meant was it was a magazine format and it was skits or small, shorter segments that would be one after another. So a bunch of brief scenes or skits, and which could be replaced if it turned out. So they could basically jigsaw puzzle together, piece together a show in this magazine format with little short snippets or skits or scenes that, as you saw here, were about 5 minutes in length, and combine them together. Okay. The first thing that they tried was just to have the Muppets. So they tried to have the Muppets, and it would just be the Muppets, and there were no people. So it was like a Muppet world with Jim Henson's Muppets. In terms of the first, when they did the evaluation work and they were testing it with focus groups and observing of kids, they found that the most effective way to keep kids engaged was to make it a mix of action, live action, of humans and Muppets. So instead of it just being the puppets, it was people and puppets, and it gave it more of a real sense to it. So that was one of the first pieces that came out of their formative evaluation. Right? So they're developing the program, and as they develop it, they're making changes to the program that they feel will improve the program. The next thing they did is they had a theme across the 1 hour. So if anyone's watched Sesame Street, so sponsored by the letter such and such and the number such and such. So that was another change that they made. Okay. So in terms of their formative evaluation, when they're designing Sesame Street, so the questions they asked themselves, maximum number of sponsors, what was the maximum number of sponsors that was conducive to learning? So, sponsored by the letter such and such and the number such and such. Well, how many numbers and letters could you have in a show? How many times should the letter or number or numbers appear during the show to maximize learning and to keep engagement? How many refresher appearances should you have? So how many times do they appear, and the sequencing of those appearances in terms of I think they're getting as the time gap. And what was the maximum number of humans and puppets that should be on the screen at one time before these characters were distracting and learning decreased? Because once again, this isn't an entertainment show. Well, it has to be entertaining, but the goal was to engage kids for learning. So if you had too much going on and made it too busy, then they really wouldn't be engaged in the learning, and then their focus would be distracted by so many characters. And as we see now with a kids program that's non-educational, like the programs are now very busy. So they're high action, high character. They're very busy, and it's just more strictly entertainment and just keeping their eyes glued on the screen without really any learning taking place. They even tested in terms of the formative evaluation, like types of voice, what elements of the show distracted viewers in terms of the settings, and what in terms of the flow of the show, in terms of and the sets that they used, the colors that they used. How did that decrease or enhance attention and learning? And something as simple as what was the optimal length of a skit. So these evaluation questions that they committed to answering, and which they did answer through formal evaluation studies, greatly improved the program. And what Sesame Street became was in large part not just due to the creativity of the designers of Sesame Street, but the ability of those designers to use the feedback that they received from kids and parents in terms of what were the most effective ways to engage the children in learning that led to outcomes where you want to see those kids ready for school when they entered, say, kindergarten. Okay. What they found with these, and this isn't the scientific method. This is just, running focus groups or running observational studies. This is how this was done. But by running these small informal studies that weren't really, controlled treatment and such, although they may have been in some way, they were able to very quickly run studies and then generate out results that then led to changes in the program. And this is very formative stuff, right? They're evolving and changing the Sesame Street show as it's being produced. And one of the most important things that they found, which was not expected, was that what really, really improved kid engagement for the show was having an adult present. So if an adult sat with a child and watched Sesame Street, that played a huge role in terms of to what extent that child attended and engaged, watched the show and engaged in the material that was part of the show. So when they found this information, what did the Sesame Street people do? Well, if they just kind of stumbled upon the notion that having an adult watch the child with having an adult watch the show with the child improve student and child engagement, then put things into the Sesame Street show that would be engaging to adults. So what you saw was, and you still see it in Sesame Street, is having adult type, adult celebrities, and they have innuendo humor and adult side humor that are like jokes and stuff that adults would get that kids don't get. So, and you can see an example here. This piece right here is partly to be informative, but the most important piece of having Norah Jones on Sesame Street was to have a parent or a caregiver sit down with that child and watch Sesame Street. Because most 4-year-olds aren't going to know who Norah Jones is.